We are live if you'd like to start.
Good morning, everybody who's tuning in. Shubharatri, if you happen to be in Nepal, or the appropriate time, whatever it may be. My name is Alex Rospat, and I direct the Himalayan Studies Initiative at UC Berkeley. And I welcome you to this event together with Sarah Schneiderman of the University of British Columbia in Canada. Before turning over to her, I would briefly like to introduce myself. I'm a scholar of Buddhism, and much of my work is dedicated to the Nepalese tradition. While I'm a textual scholar working with Sanskrit and Nevari language materials, I conduct much of my research on the ground in Nepal. Over the past 30 years, I've lived for long periods in Nepal, and I continue to stay in Kathmandu every year. So I feel closely connected to the country, and I was shocked by the events unfolding nearly 2 weeks ago on the streets of the Kathmandu Valley and elsewhere. By now, some 70 people have been confirmed dead, and the torching of public buildings and private residences, seemingly carefully orchestrated, have caused billions of dollars of damage, something Nepal can ill afford. I felt the urgency for us in Berkeley to cover these events, a sentiment that was reinforced by the reaction of some of our Nepali students on our campus. Some of them are with me in this moment, in this room where I'm speaking, who held a vigil for the victims. We used their image of the vigil for advertising today's events. I'm deeply concerned and would like to better understand why and how exactly this happened, and what it means for the future of the country I care very much about. Unlike Sarah, I have no academic expertise that would qualify me to offer explanations myself. But we've invited a number of panelists from Nepal who are well positioned to shed light on the street protests. They represent the age group, i.e. the Generation Z, driving the protests, but arguably not always controlling them. Sarah, I would like to turn it over to you. Sarah is professor in the Department of Anthropology and the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at UBC. So as I said, she's in a much better position than myself to comment on the events. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you for everybody who's joining us this morning or this evening, wherever you happen to be. And I wanted to thank Alex for initiating this event. He reached out and requested the UBC Himalaya program to collaborate on hosting this event, and that was a very welcome opportunity because it was just at the moment when many of us all over the world were struggling to understand what had happened, what was happening, what was likely to happen in the future in Kathmandu and in Nepal as a whole. So I hope that today's event gives us an opportunity to think collectively about these questions. Before going further, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you here from Vancouver on the unceded ancestral territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people, which is where our university, UBC, sits. And I know that University of California, Berkeley is also on ancestral territories. And those kinds of recognition, I think, help us to reflect upon the intertwined histories that we share together on the lands on which we live, whether it's here in North America or in Nepal, and bring us into a grounded space for reflection today about the place which we are all connected to, presumably in some way, Nepal, but also to consider the global interconnections that Nepal is also part of and which also shape the ongoing current events. As Alex mentioned, am in the Department of Anthropology and School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at UBC. I'm a sociocultural anthropologist and have worked in Nepal for 30 years as well on a range of themes regarding ethnicity, migration, indigenous mobilizations, the Maoist movement, as well as political transformation. And post-disaster reconstruction, most recently after the 2015 earthquakes. So with that, I'd like to move forward into introducing our panel members. And the way this is going to work is that I will briefly introduce all 5 of our panelists right now. And then Alex will call upon each of them individually to speak for 5 minutes to give us a quick view into their perspective on recent events. We'll then have a roundtable discussion where we have some questions prepared for the panel, and then we'll turn to the Q&A. And I'd just like to invite all of the attendees to put questions that you may have in the Q&A box, and we'll be reviewing those through the event and try to get to as many of them as possible. So I'd like to introduce our speakers, and we'll be having them speak alphabetically by surname. So first we have Tashi Lhazom, who is an activist, academic, and filmmaker known for her work at the intersection of climate action, gender equality, indigenous rights, and political and climate literacy. She's from the Limi Valley in Humla, an indigenous community that's often overlooked in national narratives. Her profound connection to her community and culture influences much of her activism and film work. Her debut documentary, No Monastery, No Village, from 2024, won several awards and focuses on the effects of climate change on the cultural heritage and lives of the indigenous people of the Limi Valley. She's also a youth engagement specialist focusing on grassroots empowerment and climate justice. And her academic background is in political science, which she studied at Hindu College, the University of Delhi. Our second speaker will be Subin Mulmi, who is a human rights lawyer and researcher. He recently worked as the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Advisor for Mercy Corps and has also worked with the Forum for Women, Law and Development as Program Coordinator and Senior Legal Advisor. He's implemented a project on civil documentation supported by UNHCR, and he has a master's degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University, where he focused on gender, human rights, and migration. Our third speaker will be Sabin.
I don't want to interrupt. Thank you, Subin. I wanted to ask you to activate the, as you are being introduced, kindly activate your video. Thank you, Sarah.
Great, thank you. So Sabin Ninglekhu will be our third speaker, and he is based at Social Science Baha in Kathmandu, where he is the principal investigator of heritage as placemaking, the politics of solidarity and erasure in South Asia. He holds a PhD in geography from the Department of Geography and Program and Planning from the University of Toronto here in Canada, and his doctoral research focused on informal politics, local governance, landlessness, and the urban poor. He also completed a 4-year postdoc project about the rebuilding of a heritage town in the Kathmandu Valley. Our final panelist is Shoumya Risal, who is a lawyer and a legal researcher based in Kathmandu. She works as a legal analyst for various members of the Parliament in Nepal, and she specializes in parliamentary affairs and reforms, legislative research, drafting, and lawmaking processes. She's also actively contributed to discussions on post-legislative scrutiny in Nepal, which involves evaluating laws after their enactment to ensure effectiveness and social relevance. She holds her legal qualifications from Kathmandu University, from which she earned an LLB law. And then Phoenix Kenney Shrestha will be our discussant. Phoenix will be responding to the comments that each panelist makes. She's a scholar based in Nepal who earned her PhD in education from the University of Cambridge with doctoral research focused on education and engaged with critical issues related to development, gender, and social change in the Himalayan context, particularly in Nepal. And her work primarily involves ethnographic and qualitative research methodology, addressing social issues such as gender roles, culture practices, cultural practices, and resilience in Nepal. Thank you. You've all now been duly introduced, and I would like to turn back to Alex to facilitate the first round of discussion. Thank you.
Tashi, could you, you're disappearing a little bit in the dark, Tashi. Batitsaola?
Uh-oh, it looks like we may have lost Tashi.
In that case, maybe in the interest of time, we'll start with Sabin, if you don't mind, Sabin.
It might be Subin.
Subin, yes. I think we were going to
Subin, yeah.
Subin. And I see a message from Phoenix saying that they just lost power. I think Tashi and Phoenix may have just lost power. So yes, let's turn to Subin. Thank you.
Subin, as we discussed before, please give us your take, your understanding, what's been happening, and what should be done with what's been happening. The floor is yours.
Thank you. That's a pretty difficult, responsibility, and I think I'll probably share my reflections on the whole situation. But I'd love to sort of learn from others in terms of what should be done, because I don't feel I have the necessary capability to answer that question. But thank you so much for having me. And before I share my reflections, I want to make it clear that I'm speaking as a legal researcher, as someone who has done some research on the issue and on the topic of constitutional law, and also as someone who's worked with sort of lawmakers directly and indirectly in different ways in the constitution making process. And let me begin by saying that Nepal, as we all of us, most of us know, has lived through 7 different constitutions in 7 decades, if my math is correct. And just in the last 40 years, we've witnessed a Maoist revolution, 2 people's movements, 2 Madesh Andolans. We became a republic from a monarchy, became a federal state, became a secular country from a Hindu kingdom, amended numerous laws to bring progressive social reforms. So in that sense, the hope of a lasting political or social change, or the unrest that precedes or succeeds the change, is not new. But this particular moment, if you ask me, feels different. And that's what I really want to reflect on. For the first time on September 8th, the OD-led government responded to peaceful calls for accountability with such blatant violence, opening fire on young activists in the heart of the capital, something that the capital has not sort of witnessed. Such brutality inside the capital is unprecedented in recent memory. The chaos that erupted after September 8th, whether seen as a justified reaction or a misdirected one, revealed the depth of public fury. People were angry, and the anger, the fury preceded September 8th as well, but was catalyzed and amplified by the incidents in September 8th in so many different ways. Despite the different reactions, what most people agree on is that the political shift that followed truly marks a historic turning point. A Gen Z-driven movement organized not through party offices, but through Discord and Reddit, and their demands go beyond regime change. Just looking at the demands, I think some of the Gen Z folks have been trying to present to the Prime Minister, and it's beyond an end to corruption or accountability. It goes to, it is about trying to achieve sustainable, lasting change and a shift in how the country is governed. But that's also, an area of rupture for me as well, because it is a chance to break party-serving governance that has sidelined the people, especially the marginalized groups, with the formation of this interim government. But the process of the formation of the interim government and the question of constitutionality of the formation of the interim government and the appointment of ministers is a really important conversation to have. And here lies the paradox. The movement has created political space, but the constitution does not provide for a civilian-led interim government outside party structures. And this is where I want to, really present my position, because my argument on this is to interpret the constitution flexibly. I know this is not a popular ask when it comes to other lawyers, but I have been sort of talking about the doctrine of necessity and using the doctrine of necessity not as a norm, but as an exception to protect the current constitution, but also to prevent collapse and to have it under judicial oversight to ensure that the civilian government does not go beyond its mandate. The other thing that I just also want to mention briefly is the importance of protecting the constitution, the current constitution as well, because despite all the flaws of the current constitution on citizenship, on gender equality and federal boundaries, it also enshrines progressive provisions on inclusion, equality, and social justice. This whole scenario, right now, it presents both opportunities and risks as well. Handled responsibly, this moment could really break the entrenched party dominance, legitimize new civic energy, and protect constitutional progress while fixing gaps. But if misused, if we go beyond what the mandate is, we really try to amend the constitution and exceed the power that is provided, then the mainstream political parties could bounce back and come back even stronger and prepared. Or worse, populist cult figures could rise, which we are sort of seeing the signs, completely hollowing out democracy in the name of revolution as well. So the real question for me is, can we seize this moment without repeating the cycles of the past? That's where I really want to end this and sort of present this question to all the other panelists as well. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
listening.
Sabin. Very interesting, and we'll return to some of the issues you raised. Sabin, may I ask you to, since we haven't reconnected to Tashi, could you give us your perspective, please?
Yes, thanks, Alex. In response to your question, I think what I'll do is mostly speak on two themes, very alive themes, political society and civil society. And I'll do so in trying to walk you all through the different activities and events that I've been part of after the 9th of September, the day of the Inferno. Because I also speak from a location, which is, I would like to call myself activist scholar. Some of you may not may have differences with it, but in my head, I try to make sense of it as using scholarship in service of activism. So after that fateful day, a lot of us belonging to different, keystone movements of Nepal, from landless movements to indigenous movements, to the Dalit movement, to movements that have to deal with, informal lending system that are kind of designating many households landless by the day. So we kind of gathered at Martin Zohtari, the research institution that many of you are very familiar with. And we had a few questions in mind because we wanted to kind of take stock of, how to make sense of what happened in the last 2 days, and particularly on the second half of September 9. So see all the carnage that unfolded, all happened in a matter of 4 to 5 hours. Everything went down. So this is a case of social movement that does not have a classic textbook representation. I think that the ferocity and the speed with which the events unfolded in and of itself requires a new theorization of how social movements happen. I'm talking about the speed of it, the intensity of it. So when we gathered at Martin Zohtari, very soon we realized that in the past, if it was easier for us all to organize around a call, within the same group of people, there was a clear line of demarcation or division, because there was one segment of the civil society, loose as the term may be, who were willing to embrace the historic moment and the role of the Gen Z in making the moment happen. We wanted to kind of embrace the change as as this kind of new lease of life that Nepali nation state is getting, on the one hand. Whereas on the other hand, we also found that there were folks who were struggling to position themselves in relation to what was happening. Because what was happening in that particular time, and things have really rapidly changed in the last 3-4 days, is that suddenly you had different collectives of representing different Gen Z groups or communities. So there were 2 or 3 groups, let's call the groups the mainstream Gen Z, who were closer in proximity to the interim government that was forming. And there were other Gen Z collectives, representing the indigenous, representing the landless, representing the Dalits, who were also trying to stake some kind of claim in this process of, making of a new future, right? So in all of this, what was very hard for a lot of us who were in Martin Chaudhary was to make sense of what is happening, because to make sense of who these young folks are, who are politically savvy, who are making calls as to who should represent them, who have suddenly access to the new kind of constellation of power that was forming, and the rest of the citizenry, including the civil society that was congregating in Martin Chaudhary, did not have access to this particular space that the Gen Zs were having access to. And there was also very clearly a communication gap between the different Gen Z collectives. So the question exists to this day, and the question itself is rapidly mutating, which is that what is the role of, let's call it, civil society in Nepal, majority of whom are not part of the Gen Z movement that made this transformative change possible? And my time is up. Time just flies. I'll make a very small note, and we can come back to it later. And it is also for the audience to kind of take stock of even Phoenix, is that there's one thing that really, really worries me a lot. Outside of the conspiracy theories and all the invisible forces that we talk about in social media and the media that have to do with the geopolitics, that have to do with the undercurrents of right-wing forces forming, what I really fear about is the kind of retributive politics that the 3 political parties might get into in the short and the long term, and that might give birth to the kind of this horizontal kind of this rapid occurrences of violences that we may not have had encounter as a Nepali society in the past. And that is really, to me, a clear and present danger and threat that we face as a society in this current time. With this, I would like to stop. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Sabin. That's very interesting. We'll definitely return to the points you raise. I have at this moment Tashi over WhatsApp here. So Tashila, you're ready to talk to us, please, and give us your perspective. Please try to do. Can you guys hear? Please start.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Namaste. Thank you so much for this platform. If there is a noises coming from my side, that's because I'm on the road to get better connection. I'm Tashi Lhazom, and I wear many hats, but mostly I'm known as a climate activist, political writer, and someone who is very rooted and a very proud young Nepali leader. For me, I come from a Limi Valley, which is located in the northwestern corner of Nepal. And I will be talking mostly about how this particular protest has been representative of the Nepal's diversity. And for me, this protest has been a revolution that happened in 48 hours. I have studied history of different countries, but never have I studied a revolution that happened in 48 hours. And this, as someone who was leading a part of it, I never thought that when I was studying it, that this would turn out in a way that has turned out. This protest, there was a great misconception, big misconception, especially reported by international media, that that we were protesting against the social media ban, which is incorrect, partially incorrect or mostly incorrect, because the major problem was not about social media ban at all. TikTok was also banned in Nepal some months back, and it wasn't necessarily met with the resistance like this. But because it was mostly about young people being fed up with the current political system, the exiting political system, or we were tired of the lack of leaders, political leaders. Because I've been, ever since I've came to know and taken interest into the Nepali politics, I've been seeing the same person again and again, similar person or same person again and again as a leader, in a way that no matter the differences in election or the elections that we do, the outcome comes almost same way. So as a Gen Z, it was difficult for us to feel represented properly by the government. This Gen Z, when it was started, it did not started with a particular leader per se. So to a great extent, one can say that this was pretty much of a leaderless. Sorry about that. It was pretty much of a leaderless when it started. Yet at the same time, this is, I think, one of the most decentralized movement and protests that I've ever seen. And because of this, it became the biggest strength of itself, as well as the biggest weakness, especially when the government toppled down and we had to organize ourselves. There were a lot of differences among us as well. But none of that differences, was not big enough. I mean, there were many moments of solidarity, and all of us, to a great extent, bonded on the corruption, lack of good governance, and lack of alternative choices of leaders. I think I will stop at this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tashila. Try to reconnect via internet if you can, once you have connectivity again.
Thank you. Yes.
And even if you can't, please stay available via WhatsApp, but internet would be much better. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Shoumya, if I may turn this over to you to give your perspective. You're, of course, in a privileged position to shed light on the inner mechanisms of the government, in the parliament more precisely.
Thank you so much, Alex. Good evening and good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be speaking to you all today here about the Gen Z protest that we've had. I'm a young female Gen Z lawyer, and at just the start of my career, I find myself standing at two very different but equally powerful spaces. On one hand, I was in the streets demanding the change from the system, and on the other, I've spent half a decade within that very system, leading ministers' legal team and drafting policies and bills and working for the lawmakers and working directly with the bureaucrats across all political spectrum. And I come to you not only as a young lawyer, but also as someone working closely in the parliamentary affairs and who's had the opportunity to observe both the political establishment as well as the pulse of the streets. So yes, I've seen the both sides, the passion of the people and the weight of the governance. So today I don't stand here as an expert or an insider, but I stand here as someone in between, as a bridge between the system that I work in and the movement that I belong to. And I really want to share with you what the recent protest in the Nepal looked like through that particular lens. I would like to quote Sir Wilson, ex-British Prime Minister. He said that a week is a long, long time in politics. And yes, it sure was in our context, because everything happened so abruptly. And yeah, we decided to take a whole lot of actions to maintain whatever stability that we were left with within that time. And the actions were mostly firstly guided by the state obligations. Secondly, I think the constitution, and thirdly, whatever pledge had to be made in order to address the protesters' demand. All of that came from the very essence of the democratic constitution, which demands that we make room for change rather than clinging only to the status quo. And in many ways, that is exactly what happened, I think, because at its core, the protest was never really about sweeping off the system. It was more about immediate and pressing issues like checking on the corruptions and demanding the good governance. So yes, I'm a little skeptic as to what exactly call the movement, whether it was revolution or it was political uprising. So yeah, for me, it was just the reminder that the constitution, though imperfect, as Subin mentioned, is a very hard-earned achievement for us and is a product of a decade of struggle and two constituent assembly that we've had. And I realize that it may not encompass anything. It's not perfect, but however, we cannot afford to disregard whatever gains that we've achieved through it. And I know Constitution stands as a guarantee, and the moment we decide to set it aside, our very status shifts as citizens, as political parties, as society, and the very democracy that we exercise. The loss of the constitution only brings in the void, and which I think Nepal is not really ready to afford right now. So yeah, from my observation, I've seen the movement really brought three different thoughts among the young people. Firstly, they were very rigid to sticking with the constitution and strictly abiding by it, and they believe that the new government must be formed from the existing legislature instead of dissolving it and looking from an alternative course outside of the legislature. And in my opinion, that would have been the best way to move forward too. But unfortunately, that did not align with the demands of the protesters, and thus we had to go with the doctrine of necessity and form an interim government. Though not fully constitutional in the making, I think we needed the interim government at that point, and it should be allowed to function until the elections, with the space for amendments in the constitution later, when the assembly is formed. And thirdly, there were skeptics and who really felt like constitution itself had failed and failed to really capture the spirit and expectations of the people. And I do not agree with the critiques here. Yeah, so I would like to conclude by stressing that the protests do play an essential role in reminding those in power that legitimacy is conditional and people are watching them. And quoting my favorite Dr. B.R. Ambedkar here, the constitution, however the constitution may be, if those who work on it happen to be bad, it will prove to be bad. So yes, I think that a constitution is only as good as the people and leaders who uphold it, and we cannot be certain how enduring today's stability is. It will prove to be, nor how yesterday's instability will shape our future. It is also unprecedented, but what is clear is that our democratic framework has to remain the foundation of whatever comes next. And as a law student, I find myself wondering how much of the Constitution we're truly been able to protect over the past few weeks. But however, I believe that the solutions are here. They are there in the Constitution, and they are available and attainable, and the way forward must be rooted within the Constitution. And yes, this is where you guys as a global community step in, I think, for the discourse, because democracy is not really built in isolation. And I'm so grateful and honored to be able to bring my small part of the story here with all you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shoumya. That's very interesting. You're echoing many of the words that we heard from Subin already. And when we start the questions, I will push you on some of the points. But before doing this, Phoenix, may I ask you to Do you have good enough internet connection at this point?
We
Raoul?
can certainly try, although,
I don't know whether you were able to follow everything. Do you want to comment on what we heard now, or do you prefer to kind of do that later?
No, fortunately, my audio didn't go out, only my light. So I feel really, really privileged to be in this position. I didn't hear my own introduction, so just to kind of qualify, I've been researching youth issues in Nepal for the last 6 years. And I'm very much a social researcher, so I loved hearing from Subin and Shoumya, someone who really understands kind of the political side, as well as Tashi being a political science student. So perhaps my role as a discussant is less to complicate what we all just heard and more kind of find the patterns and point maybe where the conversation can go. I was really happy that Subin, you started this whole evening by saying, it's been 2 weeks and still we're trying to make sense of this event, right? We still have so many questions. Shoumya, you asked some really important questions. Where did really it come from? Sabin, you also were asking some questions as well. So I think for a lot of us here, those on the ground, aren't really sure how to move forward. And what I find is so amazing about this conversation is that, Subin, you introduced this idea of kind of paradox, right? So we can have two things that are true at once. And it seems very strange, Shoumya, as well, that, this constitution exists for a purpose, yet at the same time, the choices that have been made have been very much against that. So how can these two things be true at the same time? And I think that's something, as a foreigner who's been in Nepal going on 10 years, that's something I observe Nepal does really well. They can have two things that are in exact opposition or seem like they should be in exact opposition, and at the same time, somehow space is made for two things to be true at once. What I heard from everybody, and again, it felt very validating, is this idea of emotion, right? This is, of course, a political conversation, and at the same time, it is guided by emotion, fear, anger, pride, and shame. I heard all of those emotions. I felt all of those emotions. I've heard from my peers on the ground that we've held all of those emotions, again, sometimes even at the same moment. And moments like these panels that I've been a part of in the last 2 weeks, it's as much about sharing information as it is about creating space for us to come together and process the emotions that have been associated. So something, again, not being a political science expert myself, that I really appreciated because I've had these questions. I think a lot of us were trying to pull up the Nepali constitution in the last few days and be like, what the heck is Article 78 really trying to say, or whatever number? That's probably not the right one. So I love this word of having a flexible constitution. I think that is something that maybe in the next hour or so we can really tease out. To what degree can the constitution be flexible? Is it current status, challenging that ability to be flexible? Is it actually really, upholding that flexibility? And then kind of what's the use value of this document, right? It exists for a reason. And what is that reason as we're seeing? I think that then, Shoumya, you ended on such a powerful note of democracy can't happen in isolation, right? It is about bringing people together, yet we're also kind of feeling, a government can't just be made through the people. There has to be formal representation and all of that. My last comment that I think I was prepared to share rather than what was brought up, although Sabin, you did mention it, and Tashi, you of course mentioned it. Being a youth scholar, something that has been really challenged is the discursive use of the youth label. Oh, that's a tongue twister. That it's an age-based category, so it suggests maybe a sense of homogeneity, when in reality, it is an incredibly diverse group of people. At least with the youth population, which was under 40, that's 42%. I heard the other day that the under 30 is almost 50% of the Nepal population. So this group of people they have to be diverse, right? There's no way that many people can come together and agree. And I think what I've seen in my youth, in the youth communities that I work with, is that at the same time, when there's diversity and difference, we can create cohesion that really can bring us all together forward. So those are my comments as a discussant. I'm really excited to learn from the four of you more, and I'll pass it over to moderators Sarah and Alex.
Thank you, Phoenix, for this. Very much appreciated. Shoumya and Subin, if I may push you on the question of we don't want to squander the gains of the Constitution, but and both of you invoked the idea of creating space for change. But here is my anxiety. In half a year, roughly, we will have elections. If there's no real fundamental change, won't it be the same setup, the same political parties again contesting the election? What can, within the framework of Constitution, happen so that there's real change? It seems to me I like the idea of space for change. This is a precious moment, unfortunately paid for with precious blood. And it seems to me important that this opportunity is not squandered. But I have no idea how this may not happen. My worry is that party politics are so deeply entrenched in Nepal that half a year is not much of a time to develop an alternate model. So I wonder, Subin, Shoumya, what you guys think about this. Of course, also everybody else. Shoumya, do you want to start, since you're close to the apparatus of the parliament? You might be silent at
Yes.
this moment. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. So yes, I do believe that 6 months is not enough for the real change, but I believe that whatever consequences or whatever result the Gen Z movement has resulted in is not really the result. It is just the start. The movement was not our real struggle. I say the struggle starts now. Now is the time. We have 6 months to work on the narrative, to work on the public narrative, to aware young voters and sort of break through the traditional mindset that is set that is set in the citizens, and yes, I think that's the only way out right now. And also probably civil society might have a greater role in here to really step in and ensure political democracy within the political parties. So yeah, I think that could be a way out, and I think that's the way out that it should be. So yeah.
Subin, do you want to share your thoughts before Sarah will take this further?
Sure. I mean, Alex, I shared the same sentiment on September 10 and 11 as well, when there were talks about the new interim government and possibly new elections within the next 6 months. I'm not a Gen Z. I'm above that age category, but I wasn't aware of what had happened in terms of the planning of the whole protest and what transpired later. When I sort of dived deep into the Discord conversations and the Reddit threads, and then my mind was blown. I thought I knew what was happening in the country. Then I realized I knew nothing. But the Gen Z are way ahead of probably where I was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I was doing activism. And in so many ways, the mainstream political parties were kind of caught off guard. They did not expect the protests to be so big and to demand such a change. And if you, I mean, again, looked at certain screenshots and conversations where they had planned certain violent actions as well. There were AI videos of, the Parliament House burning, which was circulated beforehand on Discord. There were other sort of Reddit threads that, there were a lot of people that were planning some, radical things, and there were a lot of groups even on Discord as well, who were, some of them are invited folks on 9 a.m., some of them invited at 10 a.m. So my point being that there is hope, because the new generation, Gen Zs, are more tech savvy, right, for now at least. They know how to use technology to create social change, and their sort of primary source of information is social media. And there are many young voters as well. And as we can see, the other generation, the older generations, also are at least looking for change and are preferring younger politicians. So there is that hope, but there is a lot of resource, there's a lot of might and power and network that the old political guards have. Fortunately, we are seeing some pressure being created by the young political forces in those political parties as well, in the mainstream political parties. Speaking to a few young friends of mine who are demanding, change in guard in the mainstream political parties as well. My actually sort of, my bigger fear, to be really honest, is that I feel, given the data, the information that I have, I think there will be change. I think it'll be very difficult for the mainstream political parties to make a comeback. I'm not saying it's unlikely. I think they will probably regroup and they have all the resources. But it will be difficult. But if you see who controls social media, you'll find the answer. If you see the kind of news that is uploaded on social media, when we were trying to do a movement against a recent political action a few months ago, against some of the younger forces, we could not make any inroads because they control the social media entirely. So I just want to maybe summarize my point, saying that I think there's hope for change, but the the younger political forces need to rise up. Again, going back to Sabin's point, a really important point. It is not a homogeneous group, right? There's so many different forces, and there is a huge risk that the more dominant groups, or the more groups with more resources and privilege, may dominate the conversations and may represent the youth groups and may dictate the terms, and especially make regressive changes especially in the constitution is my fear. And the other bigger fear is also the young. Despite all their energy and enthusiasm, there's also this worshipping culture for cult figures, where the trend, we can already see the trend, at the cost of democracy, at the cost of rule of law, at the cost of the constitution. So that's a much bigger fear, if you ask me.
Sarah, do you want to move us on? Thank you very much for this. Makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Sarah, do you want to move us on, please?
Yes, and thanks so much, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. It's been so interesting and really informative so far, and helped me see a variety of new connections between themes that have been hard to kind of grasp from afar. So I wanted to follow up on this discussion around what real change looks like by connecting to the questions of diversity and inclusion. We heard Tashi and Phoenix in particular talk about the diversity of Gen Z and the many Gen Zs that exist. I want to connect it to electoral politics also by thinking about what the March elections mean for local governments and what this entire transformation means, particularly in a context where federalism and devolution of power to new local governments only occurred in 2017. It's less than 10 years. And in many cases, those new structures at local municipal levels have enabled members of historically marginalized groups to gain access to political power in new ways. At the same time, they've primarily done that through established party channels. So what does all of this mean for thinking about kind of reconfiguration of inclusion and identity politics issues, particularly at local levels, perhaps outside of Kathmandu? And Sabin, I was wondering if you might want to take a first stab at that question, and then we could pass to others.
Thank you so much for asking probably my favorite question. This is in the sense that this is something that I've been engaging with for some time now. Because, and it comes from my ongoing involvement with, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, the no cable car movement that is happening in the Taplejung district, far eastern Nepal. Subin would know better and Shoumya would know better, but based on, folks who know better than I do, based on what they have to say in response, my guess is that the local government will last its course. So it has roughly about 2 years or so. So it will last its course, and that is going to be the case. Unless the current interim government, for some reason or the other, comes up with an ordinance for also the local government to take place alongside the federal elections. But I don't see that as happening. But be that as it may, what I think that, or at least what I have been telling folks that I've been working with, is that this might be a very unique opportunity in history where the old guards are kind of have been knocked off their perch and still trying to recover themselves. And they'll probably recover at some point or the other, but it will be some time before they recover in terms of as an electoral force. So this might be the time where a lot of folks organizing at the local level for some time, fighting against the municipal state, the provincial state, the national state, on the back of the constitution that guarantees rights, but will never give you the rights, simply because the Supreme Court is the way it is. It comes from a school of thought that kind of foregrounds a certain ways of knowledge as being the central arbiter of arguments that find legitimacy within the court system. For example, the indigenous knowledge system that we know of, where we speak of nature in certain ways, that idea of spiritual in certain ways, these kinds of arguments have in front of me being dismissed as belonging to the Stone Age. So this is the kind of like discussions that take place in the Supreme Court. So coming back to the local, I think this might be this one historical moment, unprecedented, where a lot of locals led by the youth, in different places could organize politically, assemble resources, find new ways to run election campaigns that they know better than me. I'm not a Gen Z. They know better than someone like me to kind of really try and see how can they change the electoral landscape at the local level, because federalism really starts at an everyday level. It's federalism. It's really the state-society contract between a member of a neighborhood association and the ward office, the chair of the ward office. That relationship has to fundamentally change. And that will only happen if you have your people leading the ward government, if you have your people forming the part of the executive committee, leading the municipal government. So it has to happen it has to start at the local, I think. And this is not, again, to valorize the local, but this is what I have in mind. And this is what, quite frankly, this is what I've been, whenever I've been asked to share a thought or two, this is what I've been telling folks in the informal settlements. In the Far East and so on. So it's time to organize. It's time to make a list of candidates. It's time to put together resources. Elections, unfortunately, cannot be won without money. So it's time to organize. So those are the things that come to my mind. And yeah, I can get easily animated in response to this. But yeah, I'll stop here.
Thanks so much, Sabin. Yeah, that helps to illuminate some of those dynamics that I've been thinking with as well. Tashi, I wanted to bring you into this conversation. Thank you for rejoining us here. I'm glad you could get back on. And just in case you didn't hear the prompt, the question was about the implications of transformation at this center for particularly local governments and what all of this means for federalism going forward, as well as for the genuine aspirations for inclusion from around the country that you were speaking to earlier.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be back. Yeah, so when we started the protest, we did not have a intention in our mind that we're going to take down the government. Our only intention was to hold the government as per the Constitution, hold them accountable for the years and years of corruption, not just the taxpayer money corruption, but also the corruption of power and corruption of spirits among young generations. I love using this metaphor. Like in a computer system, there's virus, and we want to take out the virus, not to format the whole system. But it happened, and what happened was, once there was executive vacuum, so much was demanded from, not demanded, but asked from young generations, such as, oh, give us your name for the PM. We never started our protest thinking in mind that we're going to change the PM. So everything became so fast, and there so many things happened at rush, so many high emotions. There's sanity, there's insanity, and so much of this. While the protests happened at this Kathmandu, mostly attacking the central government, especially the corrupted politicians or those who are in the news for all the corruptions and everything. This also spread to the provincial level and regional level as well. The district that I come from is called Humla. It is supposedly one of the districts that is not given much political space or preferences. Even there was so much demand and calling out the previous leaders who's been ruling Humla for many decades, and still Humla is one of economically a backward district. There were calls at that level, and I also come, and from a province perspective, I come from Karnali. In the Karnali, the chief minister's residential houses were burned. So it started from federal level, and it went all the way. So that's the one important, I guess, perspective regarding the federalism. And also right now, we have a huge challenge ahead, because we have to conduct election in 6 months. At the same time, we want to make sure that the government is representative of all the diversity of Nepal. And it's really difficult when they reach out to me to ask for recommendations from certain communities that I was representing. It was difficult to find someone who does not have political inclination. Now, this movement is definitely not against political party or the party system. We appreciate the multi-party system nature of Nepali democracy. What we wanted was a political structural change within those political party and institution. And because many of the major political parties in Nepal have not gone through restructuring within them, and often prioritizes party over the country, there was so much distrust against anybody who has political inclination. And I'm from the mountains, so I don't want to create a stereotype, but there is a pattern that mountain people tend to stay away from politics for many reasons. One of them is the language, and also the mountain people, when it comes to politics, we're not a community that is easily get political access either. So it's very difficult for us, especially those in the grassroots, to stay connected with what's happening here. And when there was a demand to bring up so many leaders from so many different communities, there was specific difficulty in bringing mountain people's representative, because those who are upfront are mostly either from a business elite that the Gen Z people are definitely not happy about, or they already have a political inclination. So it was quite a challenge, and I'm sure it must be a challenge to other community as well. And when I was leading the protest, or helping to lead and organized, one of my major concern was to make sure that those at the marginal, the young Gen Z, I would always say that it's not a homogeneous group. There's among Gen Z, there are diversities, like there are Dalit Gen Zs, mountain people, indigenous Gen Z, there are Muslim Gen Zs, and there are also Gen Zs from the historically privileged communities as well. And as you see mostly in the mainstream media and there's mostly a lot of coverage on certain leaders. But I was so worried that this time mountain youths, mountain Gen Zs might get left out. Because, of course, when I was leading or helping to lead, it was by no means planning to be violent. So that's why I wanted as many people as possible, especially, from the community, the Bauda that I stay in. Because my reason to do that was I've seen in my own community that people are vocal, very vocal about our issues. But the minute we stay limited within our issues, we become a leader of our community, not the national leader. And I believe that every marginalized youth or Gen Z have a potential to be national leader. It's just that they have to transcend beyond community issue. And for us to transcend beyond community issue, we had to take a deeper dive into what is happening at the national level, that we can connect with the grassroots level too. So that was my major point in telling the people in the Boulder area to join the protest. And of course, I did not expect it to go that violent, but nevertheless, there has been a very, very good participation from different communities, and each of them have different agendas for sure. There are radical youths too, radical Gen Zs. They are liberal. They are neutral and all that. But we all wanted to see change in the way the governance is conducted. But it got very violent, and I think there has been violation from the state side as well as from arsonist side as well.
Thank you, Tashi. Yeah, it's a really challenging question, trying to figure out how to do politics without the politics, right? Or to have a different kind of politics. I think that's really the, the task at hand, how to refashion what that very thing means so as to achieve the goals that that have been laid out here. Let me ask if any other panelists want to take up this question about relationships between central and local governments, and also questions around inclusion, which we have several questions around in the chat as well. If not, we can move on to another area of discussion.
If I could just briefly talk about that. Right?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'll be very brief. I think my 2 cents on this whole issue of inclusion and just federalism as well is I think it's sort of important to acknowledge that the federal structure that we have right now, based on the current constitution, is extremely problematic. It does not. It does not provide the. It's not proper devolution of power, and the federal states do not have the authority that federal structures in other countries like India and in the US and other countries have. They're very limited power. The local governments have more power. They have more budget. But it is not the federalism that was envisioned by the identity movement, and it wasn't a compromise at all. It was no middle path. It was a complete annihilation of the actual demands of federalism. Just sort of reversed back to the 5 development region format, and it just initially was 6 federal states and then 7 federal states. So to ensure full federalism and restore, and because the reason I use the term restore is because right now the identity movement in so many ways is not very active, and I was hoping that through these conversations that we're having on the Constitution there would be more interest. But I was really amazed by what Tashi just shared in terms of how the community sort of taking on the national issue on a central issue, and that sort of shedding more light on the community issues as well. So yeah, I think these conversations, these insights from Gen Z leaders have continued to sort of really amaze me with the level of depth that they have, the level of thought they've put into the whole process of negotiating with the interim government or forming the interim government. So I think it's easy to dismiss them and say that, oh, they don't know the context, they don't know the history, they don't know what has happened, all the work that has gone into the whole process of forming this new constitution, all the different movements we've had in the past. But I think they're really, really smart, and then they know what they're doing. So there will be some people who are radical, but I think the larger group, they have put in a lot of thought and research into the whole process. Just want to end there. Thank you.
If I may quickly add to whatever Subin said right now, I completely agree that we need more discourses around federalism and its existence in Nepal. And I accept that our federalism may not be perfect. We have a lot of limited powers and revenue model restrictions for the provinces and financial and policy level autonomy. But I think the challenge here now is to achieve a stable government and make the elections happen right now, right? So that being set as our priority, simultaneously we could have a lot of discourses around what can we do to improve our federalism and devolution of power more, and probably let the new legislature decide, because I truly believe that public mandate should be the way to go, and it should come from the ballot rather than protest. So yes, I think the discourses must go on, but whatever happens, I think it has to go from the legislature. And that being said, I do realize that federalism is not within the basic structure of the constitution, so that so it means that it is amendable. And yes, I think we need more discourse around this.
Tashi, I see your hand up if you want to just comment very briefly before we move on to the next topic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that one of the conversations that keeps coming up again and again when we were doing all post-protest reflection was, it might also depend on the circle that I go into. So there were a lot of calls saying we don't want the province government. But it was very interesting for me that none of them was saying, oh, we don't want the entirety of federalism. There was definitely strong stance coming from saying, oh, we need the local government. And in my own understanding, it is because for very minority communities, I mean, Nepal is very rich in diversity. Local government has been more representative than the central government has ever been. And in my own perspective, Limi, the community that I belong to, had its first person ever in the government in 2000, after the local government came into being. And then there was more presence of the state in the community. And Limi is supposed to be one of geographically very, very rural area that remains cut off from the rest of the world for at least 6 months due to the snow and all. So it was very interesting. I just noticed that there is a little resistance against the province government, but not on the local and not on the central government.
Thanks so much. That also addresses one of the questions in the chat around protests regarding local and provincial governments. And I think what you've just said here, Tashi, also matches with my own observations, particularly in Dolakha and Sindhupalchok, where I've long worked regarding the role of local governments in fostering greater access and inclusion. So I think what you've just said here is that this is not necessarily anti-federalism, it's advocating for a different kind of federalism, just as I think we've heard from many of the speakers as well. The protests as a whole are not anti-democratic. In fact, it's calling for more democracy, a better and different kind of democracy. And I think these are really important points to note, to also push back against some of the notions that that this kind of protest enables the complete or legitimizes those forces that might wish to completely take apart the system such as it exists. So it sounds like it's working towards finding a balance. So the next question I want to turn to is about corruption. We have several questions in the chat that circle around this. And the overarching question really is, what does a Nepal free of corruption actually look like? Catherine March has written, what ideas do you have for transforming the culture of patronage and corruption in Nepal? Tutun Gurung has written, my question is, can the current interim Nepali government officially invite expert Nepalis not stained by the corruption in Nepal living abroad to help build a new government? If yes, how? If not, why not? So I'd like to put this question to the entire panel, especially considering the important role that social networks play in Nepal for every element of life, as I think all of us are familiar with. So what is the vision, or how do you actually see establishing a new system where corruption is not part of it, or what does that actually mean to you? Yes, please go ahead, whoever might like to take that one on first.
Can I go?
Yes, oh, sorry, please, yes.
I don't think that Nepal would be, it would be very, very utopistic to say Nepal is going to be 100% corruption free. But I think as the current prime minister would have said in the past, what Nepal doesn't want is the Kuleam Brastachar, which basically means the corruption in the broad daylight. It is my own vision and my dream that you go to government offices without thinking that you have to pay bribe to get the things done. I think at the very least, this should be, because right now, in order to get many things done and to fasten the process, there's always bribe that is expected out of you, or otherwise you ended up waiting many hours and spending so much time just to get one document right. I think at the very least, it would be that. Another is that it would be, again, utopistic to say that Nepal will be 100% corruption free with this government coming in. But I would really, really hope to see less of it, and definitely not the Kuleam Brastachar. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Can I invite Sabin perhaps to come in response to that question? No, 1 minute, okay?
No, I
Sabin,
said
please
that's
go ahead.
Subin, right?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's me. Was that for me? I really don't know, Sarah, where to begin from. I think I'll start with an anecdote. So on the 10th of September, I was on the phone in my neighborhood, in a local coffee shop. This young boy, who I've seen grew up in front of me since he was very little, walked up to me and he said, "Congratulations," but it was said in a very stiff tone. It was very firm. And he's a very active member of the Nepali Congress Party. So I was taken aback, and I said, what is up with that? So I'm saying this to say that there's a lot of, anger that is spread across, neighborhoods and villages and wards, where a lot of these young folks who have always relied on the dispensation of patronage to have suddenly, taken away. The chain has broken. So one of the fear that I've stated early on is that you could see a lot of this frustration where, a lot of this party workers, mostly young men, have suddenly are detached from that, crony capitalist chain from which they have benefited vertically. So I think that is one. And the other is, it also depends on how you look at corruption, right? So if you want to look at the policy level, one has to think perhaps slightly counterintuitively, and this is not a very popular thing that I'm going to say. I'll probably, if this gets out on the media, I'll probably get a lot of comments that won't be so nice. So a lot of these members who are part of the cabinet, who have become cabinet ministers in the current government, one of the single most and important, I think, category based on which they have been picked seems to be that they are corruption free, right? They have that image, that representation. But it is also important to note with regard to, for example, one particular Ministry of Energy, Kulman Singh, for example. And I say this, and it is not a popular thing to say. It was during his tenure in the electricity department that a large number of hydropower licenses were handed out. As a result, from the base of Solukhumbu to Taplizung to Raswa to Bozeni, there are a lot of indigenous communities that have been fighting day in, day out, for the right to land and shelter and local economy, the right to make money and so on and so forth. And I think the handing out of licenses take place as a result of not exactly corruption, but some kind of misdeeds happen at some level of bureaucracy. And something else happens, which is something like, free and prior informed consent doesn't happen at the local level. So that is something that the electricity department ought to do very rigorously, because Nepal has signed the particular, Nepal is, what is the term? What is the legal term for that? Nepal has ratified that. It is an international law. The Supreme Court doesn't need to issue an order saying that there has to be a new law to kind of implement free and informed prior consent. So I think I do not know where to start. Is it at the local level where a lot of frustrated party workers of the United Marxist-Leninist and the Maoist and the Nepali Congress are suddenly lost? Their source of day-to-day income has kind of gone out of hands. It's kind of melted in thin air to the kind of this scrupulous things that happen at the policy level, where licenses are just handed out to do all sorts of hydropower projects. Now, for all of this to radically change, I don't think such a thing would even be possible. And I think it may be too early to see what kind of this party I hope responds to, because I was looking through the questions as well. Kathy March's question too is that I think of what happened in the aftermath of 2015 earthquakes, and I'll be less than a minute now. 2015 earthquakes. What the government of Nepal did back then was, even when it had different state institutions at the district level, at the central level, at the local level, it felt it was necessary to set up reconstruction committees at all scales of governance. To respond to the demands of the disaster. What we're going through is a unique moment in history where the state as we know it no longer exists. And the new thing that has formed, which is not completely formed, has this mandate of, having a go at corruption. So I was thinking the other day, why can there not be a radical restructuring of the state where we have anti-corruption committees at all scales of governance, from the central to the provincial, district, local, ward, and so on and so forth. So that kind of radical transformation of the state institutions at all scales of governance may be necessary if the current interim government is really serious about corruption. But then one also has to be prepared for the backlash.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Let me just ask if any other panelists want to address this in brief. Yes, thank you. Subin, do go ahead.
Thank you. I think I'll be sort of following up on what Sabin mentioned. And I'll actually borrow a few arguments that were shared by another Gen Z lawyer when I shared a panel with him. And he was one of the critics, like Shoumya mentioned, who wanted to abolish the constitution, start a new constitution. And I think he made some really good points. I'm going to borrow those same arguments. Because looking at it from a legal standpoint, corruption is heavily, politicized in terms of party politics, because the Commission on the Investigation of Abuse of Authority and all the other commissions, all of the constitutional commissions are appointed by the Constitutional Council, so they are politically appointed. So they serve party interests more than actually, in practice, we have seen that they serve party interests more than what they ought to do in terms of curbing down corruption or investigating cases of abuse of authority. The 2020-2021 appointment made by the Oli-led government through ordinances, 52 appointments, which were made unilaterally, was a strong indication of that. And we've seen, the CIA sort of trying to target certain folks who are not higher up in the pecking order and trying to find smaller fish in the pond. So. And it's not just the Constitutional Council, but also the Judicial Council, which is also another, again, hopefully there are no judges attending this event. But, the judiciary is also extremely corrupt, because the judicial council is again politically appointed as well. So if you see all the authorities that are supposed to investigate and decide on cases of corruption are all politically appointed, who share loyalties with their political party that have appointed them. They have to do a lot of bootlicking and for them to become judges, and they have to serve the party interest when they become judges as well. And also, when they become a part of different political, different commissions, or I mean, even the police, even all the government forces, right? The party politics is so strong. In that sense, the Gen Z folks the Gen Z lawyers and activists do understand. They understand the whole process of the party appointed, politically appointed system, which has completely sort of strengthened and continues to reinforce corruption in the country, and why it is so important to end that hegemony of the political parties, especially the mainstream political parties. And that's why I think in so many respects, the demand for constitutional reform, if done through the right process, to change the whole process of appointing those commissions is extremely important to have that conversation as well. If we are really to, end corruption, and going back to Sabin's point, even if we have different layers of, authorities to investigate and decide on cases of corruption, as long as those bodies, those people who are part of those bodies are appointed politically, it doesn't serve that interest as well. And again, I want to go back to local elections and local authorities. Yes, there's more inclusion, there's more representation, but because the federal structure wasn't, institutionalized in a manner to protect protect identity politics or to strengthen the marginalized group's interest, the representation in the different local governments is again politically appointed. Do they share more loyalty or towards the political parties or the communities that they represent? Is a really big question. So that's why I think those demands in terms of ending the partisan politics in the appointment of government commissions and government bodies is really important. Is an important conversation. And keeping all these arguments aside, we live in a country in the global south where there's high socioeconomic inequality. The government officials are not paid enough money. And again, not trying to justify corruption at all, but if you look at all the other global south countries where there is massive socioeconomic inequality, there is more corruption. So we can put in place some safeguards, but as long as the socioeconomic inequality is not addressed, corruption will find different ways to exist.
Thank you so much for all of these thoughts. I see Phoenix wants to make a comment, and then and Shoumya as well. Yes, big topic for everyone. And then I'm going to turn it back to Alex. I see we're at the 10 o'clock mark. I think we can go until 10:15. Sorry, another 15 minutes. I hope that's okay with everyone here. And it helps us get back the time after the power cuts and so forth, make up that time. Phoenix, over to you.
Yeah, again, as not a panelist, I'll be very, very brief. And I want to, again, as my role as a discussant, kind of point out things that were mentioned. Tashi, I loved what you said. I think when we think about corruption, the obvious thing is bribery and the passing of money, right? But you use this phrase of corruption of spirit. And I've similarly heard corruption of opportunity, right? So it's not just paying the bribe, because if you don't pay the bribe, you're losing your time, right? Your time is being stolen from you if you're spending 4 or 5 weeks, even at time, in those government offices. And thinking about this as a very young issue, Sabin, I think that in a weird way, the comment you made of this young congressy man, his own, way to work through the system itself got corrupted through this protest, right? Again, that might not be like the most cool thing to say, but, trying to figure out a way through the system, right? Using the people, Afno Manche, using SourceForce. This is not necessarily corruption through financial means, but it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's finding solutions. As someone with a foot in education, I also see there's the learning adjusted years of schooling. So for a lot of Nepali students, they spend 12 years in primary to secondary school, but that equivalates to about only 8 years of schooling. So again, it's the loss of opportunity, it's the waste of time, it's kind of the not reaching the expectations that you were told you'll reach. So I'll pass that on to Shoumya.
Yes, so from my experience in the ministry, I would like to talk more on policy level corruption rather the financial corruption part, because I've seen firsthand that bureaucrats are rather reluctant when it comes to making the drafts of the policies public and sort of putting it out there to collect feedbacks from the general public. Recently, they might have started doing it in the much later stage, but initially, when they sit to draft, the procedure itself is not very transparent. And when we as consultant would ask them for the policy, we would also get denied most of the times. So yeah, I think we need more transparency as of to the process of policymaking and lawmaking as a whole, so that the watchdogs and the civil society and the citizens can also see and have access to the policies and drafts that are being made within the ministries and the parliament. Having said that, I would also like to emphasize on what Subin said, depoliticization of the commissions. Also, probably try restructuring the election commission more, because of the cost of politics in the elections. I think that also really contributes in the later corruption that happens within the ministry level or in the elected representatives level. Maybe function it like India, make it a little independent and make it go autonomous once the elections are announced. I think those are some of the ways that we could control corruptions. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And these comments have helped to address several of the questions in the chat as well about why there was so much ire directed against the judiciary, as well as legislature and executive branches of the government. I'm now going to turn it back to Alex for a final question and to wrap up our event in the next several minutes. Thank you.
Subin, you invoked the Global South and you talked about what happens beyond Nepal. So Nepal is, of course, sandwiched between China and India. We are just seeing what happens in Bangladesh, where the country seems to be edging closer to China because of the chauvinist politics of India, if I may say so. So I'm wondering at this moment, since for such a long time, India's called the shots. Whatever happened in Nepal needed to be approved by the West Wing in Delhi. And of course, China is getting ever more assertive. So I'm kind of concerned and wondering whether the open space we talked about is actually really open, or whether these two nations might kind of exert their influence and try to move things their own way. This is one big question. And I'm adding on to this, since I'm moving beyond Nepal in my thoughts. As we all know, it's an incredible loss for Nepal, the exodus of young, capable men spread around the world where they earn. Of course, the remittances sent back to Nepal. But there, from my perspective, not a real recompense for the loss of able people who could build a better country. So that's one concern. Another question that I have, sitting here with the Nepalese students on our campus, what could be the possible role of Nepalese living beyond Nepal? Not just those, Laura, not only those working for money, but getting educated or being professionals beyond Nepal. So these are kind of two different questions I would like to throw out. Thank you. Maybe Sabin, or Subin, since both of you kind of gestured towards the question of the outside players already in your remarks, maybe you would like to comment on this.
Subin, please go ahead.
Sure. I always say I try to be brief, but then I'm not. But this time I'll try better. I think the difference between the Bangladeshi sort of protest and Nepal is the role of, or I guess the perception of India, where in Bangladesh the role of India or the support or lack thereof was different in the case of Bangladesh, whereas in Nepal we've seen that there's some level of acquiescence by India, and I don't want to say support, but or active support, but they're not extremely displeased with the change in guard. And I think these were some of the concerns that I kind of alluded to earlier on as well. What concerns me when I talk about this, the centrally located Gen Z leaders who are demanding, change and corruption, but also see alliances being formed with, pro-monarchy forces or other forces who are at not at the behest of the Indian government, but are, working more sort of favorably with the interest of the BJP government, which this is where I say when it threatens the whole fabric of the country in terms of democracy and secularism and the federal structure. So that's a much bigger concern I have, and India and China will always exert their forces. They always have, they always will. We are in a, sometimes we overplay geopolitics and don't give a lot of credit to our own leaders for their wrongdoings and blame it on India and China all the time. But those forces do play a huge role, and right now that's a sort of concern. I think I personally have the close ties that is being built with the Balan forces and the RSP and RPPN and looking at possibly a new government that would be formed by that particular coalition, whether they would start conversations on monarchy, on secularism, and in the name of revolution, in the name of lasting change is a really big concern that I have. In terms of his second question, in terms of what other Nepalis who are outside of the country can contribute towards, I think I don't have a really good answer to this. I really don't know. I think looking at where I was when I was studying abroad, I always felt that the best thing that I could do was try to speak to as many people without sort of burdening them as well, because most of everybody's really occupied and trying to understand or assess the situation as well. So, what I tried to do was to self-educate myself, to create reading resources, or, for us to understand and I guess create panel discussions or conversations like these to, to be better aware of the situation, because I think the perception that we build when we're not in the country, we're not privy to certain conversations that people who who are actually on the ground. So it's very difficult to gain that perspective, and can only be I guess achieved through these kinds of discussions without overburdening the people on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense to me. Sabin, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, in agreement with Subin, I'll just try to be super quick, add one or two points. I think people within the media circles of Kathmandu, it's an open secret that the research and analysis wing, RAW, of India, is heavily influenced in the past decade or so by RSS, right? The Hindutva outfit. It's how journalists talk when they meet over tea. Now they have their own access. I say this to say that this same circle of reporters have intimated that the Indian establishment may not have so much of interest in influencing the political outcomes from the current interim order, including influencing the elections and so on and so forth. And my guess as to why that is so is because the larger, if it is true that it is the RSS that's running RAW, then the larger goal of this particular brand of politics is to create the Hindu nation, right? To spread the majoritarian politics. And I think there are far better, far reliable spawning grounds on the south side of Nepal, across the borders, for this particular politics of the religious right to kind of, do the border crossings and kind of immerse in a way that may have more profound effects on the Nepali polity as far as the creation of the Hindu Rashtra and the strengthening of Hindutva politics is concerned. And that may be one of the reasons why the Indian establishment may not, may not see themselves as having a lot of stake in the current order. And it also has to be kept in mind that that I was reading somewhere, it was for the first time that Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, sent a congratulatory note to Sushila Karki, the recently appointed Prime Minister, while he was out in the field in Manipur, breaking the age-old tradition of sending those congratulatory wishes from the Prime Minister's office. So all these are indications that, that of course the Indian establishment have always played a pivotal role throughout the history of state making in India in keystone political crisis. But this might be something different, precisely because this is unprecedented. This just happened at the speed of light, and this was led. Of course, there are infiltrators from all hues and colors, but it was primarily led by the Gen Zs of Nepal. And it also is important to, I suppose, keep sight of the fact that, of course, there might have been infiltrators, but of course, some kind of geopolitics might have been at play, but it was primarily homegrown. And we should never lose sight of the fact, even if we like to, dance around in these conspiracy theories, that it is primarily homegrown and it is led by the youth.
Thank you for this. Very quickly, Tashi, because at the end I want to pass it on to Phoenix to make concluding remarks. But please, Tashi.
Yeah, I really echo whatever the Sabinji said about how homegrown it is. But having said that, I have to admit that there was within the movement there was a call for taking down of the constitution and all, saying we don't want constitution and stuff like that. And those factions, some of them actually went after the president and did arsonist activities in the president house as well. I have to also admit that while I was studying in India, I have come across some of my friends, Indian friends, who are more excited for Nepal to become Hindu state than some Nepali themselves. It was interesting. And also, one of the Hindi daily called Dainik Bhaskar, when they reported about the protest, their title read, Nepalese Gen Z are protesting for Hindu Rashtra. So there was a lot of, India seemed to be creating a different narrative out of this protest for sure. But yes, it is really homegrown. And I think on September 8, before 12 p.m., before the firing started, everything was very, very normal, like any other protest would be. Things changed after the firing started, and the next day it was even more violent. And I think in the next day, the opportunists have gotten more power into, and jump on the bandwagon and call it just Gen Z thing, even though they were not doing things that Gen Z protests in the initial have agreed to, that is to be very peaceful. In fact, when the protest started, people were singing the national, not national, all Nepali songs and just carrying the placard and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tashila. So we're going a little bit over time, but this is a really productive conversation. I'm learning so much. I'm very grateful for everything that you've been contributing. Phoenix, it would be great if you could kind of wrap up our event and address the main, talk to the main points that we've been covering. Thank you. Phoenix.
Sure. Again, I feel very, very grateful to have the power of the last 2 minutes of this amazing event. I think in the second half, where we had much more fluid discussion before everyone, there are really kind of two things that I want to pull out. Is this idea of responsibility and accountability. I think for a long time, the political leaders have not taken accountability, and all of a sudden, we have this group of young people who have never had any responsibility, right? A lot of them live with their families. A lot of choices are made in very supportive networks. They have this incredible responsibility that they are taking on themselves to make choices, not just for themselves and their families, but for their nation as a whole. And I think it's very easy from a distance, from at home, whatever, to criticize, oh, again, it's a leaderless movement. They didn't have an agenda. It just kind of got out of their hands. Those things might be true. And at the same time, we see a group of people really stepping up into that. So I think that that is such an amazing thing to celebrate rather than criticize. Of course, we can still be critical and offer, counters, but I really want to notice that. And then Sabin, I want to re-quote what you said of it's time to organize. For a lot of us on the ground, we've had this return to normal life in the last 2 weeks, right? Ever since the curfew lifted early Sunday morning, I believe it was the 14th or 15th, people are back to work, back to school. And it's this strange, okay, we have to go about our daily life, right? We have to earn money. We have to buy groceries. Yet it is time to organize. We only have now 5.5 months until elections come. And in order to be elected, in order to have a party, you have to gather resources. Like you said, elections are not cheap. So I think it's going to be a really, really interesting time of folks who are already putting so much effort on the ground, who have experienced immense loss, whether emotional loss, physical loss, financial loss, to demand more from them, right? We have this group of students, a lot of them are students, a lot of them have jobs, to really kind of up the ante. So I think it's time to organize. It's such a great line to end on, and I'll pass it on to you, Alex, to wrap the rest of this event up.
Thank you very much for this, Phoenix. There are many other questions that Sarah and myself would have loved to consider. And I think it would be great to have some kind of follow-up event. One of the remarkable aspects of this for somebody who's not of the younger generation is the role of the social media, particularly of the app Discord and of Reddit, and the kind of polling that took place about agreeing on the caretaker prime minister. There are a lot of things that I'm very curious about and very impressed about. And allow me to add my note of thank with a cautionary note as an old guy. So as Subin has rightly said, there are intrinsic networks of patronage. So the elders, not the youngers, have more to lose by change. It's just the nature of the game. It's not specific to Nepal. So I pray that the generation Z is taking this on, will continue to renew itself, not becoming part of the establishment that's being swept away now. Thank you very much for you guys for being here. I'll be in touch, and I do hope we can have a follow-up event sometimes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Namaste.